You will find a lot of closed doors when you're an immigrant. Behind those doors, there are opportunities, there's success. How do you open them? Language is the first key. My name is Khadija, a linguist immigrant in Sweden, and I'm here to help you learn Swedish and integrate yourself into the Swedish society. If you follow me on Patreon, then you have done the exercise where we put verbs ending in er in one box and the rest in the other. The point of this exercise was to introduce you to the imperative form of the Swedish verb. Step 1 in today's module is dedicated to the superstar of the Swedish verb forms, the imperative. Why is it the superstar? Because the imperative form of the Swedish verb is the same as the root of the verb, based on which all other forms of the verb are derived, for example, in the past. This means that if you can identify the imperative form of the verb, then you automatically know what the verb should look like in the past. As a language learner, you usually come across verbs for the first time in a conversation. For instance, somebody asks you, "Vad heter du?" and you learn the word heter. You don't know the root of the verb, you don't know what this verb looks like in the past, but you know what it looks like in the present tense. That's why we're going to use the present tense in order to identify the imperative form of the Swedish verb. And guess what? It's super easy. The rule of thumb is that in the present tense, verbs end in er. For instance, läser, jobbar, bor, går, äter. They all end in er, but what matters is which letter stands before er. Is it preceded by e or some other vowel? If a verb ends with er, like läser and äter, it means that the root of the verb ends with a consonant. So you take away er and you're left with the root of the verb. So the root of the verb läser is läs, and the root of the verb äter is ät. If, on the other hand, a verb has a vowel other than e in front of är in the present tense, such as bor, it means that the root of that verb ends with that vowel. So you take away är, and what you're left with is the root of the verb. For example, the root of the verb jobbar is jobba. The root of the verb bor is bo, and the root of the verb går is gå. As I said in the beginning, the root of the verb is the same as the imperative form of the verb. That is, if you want to give someone an order or if you want to make a request, ask somebody to do something, you will use the root of the verb. For example, if you want your friend to go to the theater, you can tell him or her gå på teater in the imperative form. Let us discuss a few more examples. In the first column, we have verbs in the present tense. In the second column, we have their root forms, which are the same as the imperative forms. And then we have some examples. Let us start with the examples directly. If, for example, your friend is complaining about the fact that there are not many jobs in Malmö, then you can tell him, move to Stockholm. And in Swedish, you would say, flytta till Stockholm. If your child isn't eating breakfast, you can remind him, ät frukost, have breakfast. If your friend has just moved to Sweden and he's looking for a job, you could give him a piece of advice, studera svenska, learn Swedish. So if you know the present tense form of the verb and the rules that I just taught you, then you already know the imperative form and how to make requests. In Swedish, it's very common to start your request by var snäll och. For instance, var snäll och ät frukost, you could say to your child. Keep, however, the following things in mind. When making a request and saying something in the imperative, you're usually talking to the second person, du or ni. And this is taken for granted, meaning that you don't need to mention that person in the sentence and you just start the sentence directly with the verb. For example, eat breakfast, ät frukost. And you already know that I'm talking to you. I don't have to say du ät frukost or ni ät frukost. So you start an imperative statement with a verb. However, Swedes are not the most direct people and they like to soften things. So you might hear var snäll och ät frukost, like the example that I gave earlier. Or they can ask you, drick vatten, är du snäll? So they often add something similar to please at the beginning or at the end of the statement. On step 2, we cover the prepositions of place that we learned in modules 1 and 2 so that we can understand why certain prepositions were used in certain contexts. We start with the preposition I and we start by discussing examples. I is used for big places like villages, towns, cities, countries. For instance, hon bor I Stockholm or hon bor I Sverige. I is also used to say that one thing is inside the other. For instance, boken är I väskan. Or even with certain phrases like lying in bed. Jag ligger I sängen. Then you also use I with buildings if you want to emphasize that you're inside the building. For instance, vi är I kyrkan emphasizes that we're inside the church. However, if you want to emphasize the activity instead, then you use the preposition på, which means at in English. For instance, vi är på kyrkan. We are at the church and maybe praying. Jag är på jobbet. I'm at work and working. Jag är på skolan. I'm at school attending the lessons, and so on. I'm at home is an exception because you don't use på. Instead, you say directly jag är hemma without a preposition. But normally, when you want to emphasize an activity, especially if it's a part of your lifestyle, then you want to use på. For instance, jag går på teater. I go to the theater, meaning I'm a theater goer. I go to the theater regularly. But if you want to emphasize not an activity, but rather that you're on your way to some place, then you use till. Jag går till teater. I'm on my way to the theater to watch a performance or to meet a friend, who knows. And obviously, på is used when one thing is on the surface of the other. For instance, katten är på soffan. The cat is on the sofa. Or boken är på bordet. The book is on the table. Other prepositions of place that we have covered include från. For instance, jag kommer från Sverige. Or ifrån, as in varifrån kommer du, which is more often phrased as var kommer du ifrån. That was it for today. We have fixed the gaps that remained in modules 1 and 2, and now we're ready to dive into more complicated aspects. As usual, I recommend that you check out my Patreon page and practice the exercises tied to this module so that you can develop your Swedish skills faster. There you will even gain access to what I call situational learning, where you place yourself in certain situations and learn vocabulary around it. These videos on situational learning will really help you conduct your everyday activities more efficiently and to communicate with people around you. Lastly, we have a long way to go, but we have covered a lot of material in a very short period of time. So keep your engine running. Becoming a member of the Swedish Society is going to take a lot of effort and sacrifice, but what you get in return is going to be worth it. I'll see you in Module 4.